The phone rang, shattering the silence of midnight. My heart jumped as I fumbled to answer, only to hear my wife's trembling voice crack through the line. "Help me, David. They left me on the road. I'm freezing to death." Her words came in broken gasps. She told me that muggers had ripped her purse away, smashed her phone to the ground, and abandoned her on a desolate stretch of highway. Snow whipped around her, each gust like knives against her skin. She was stranded nearly 120 miles from home, on a deserted highway where the only witness to her suffering was the dim, flickering neon sign of an old gas station called Miller's Corner. No cars, no passers-by, just an empty road swallowing the night. When I finally arrived, the sight seared itself into my memory. My wife, Karen, was curled on the icy pavement, her thin coat soaked through with snow, her hands purple and stiff, her lips pale as ash. Her wide, terrified eyes met mine eyes that looked like they'd been torn from the warmth of home and thrown into a frozen wilderness. And the cruelest truth of all? The ones who had cast her out weren't strangers. It was our own daughter, Emily, and her husband, Jason, the very man I had once embraced as a son. They had slammed the door on her, leaving her trembling in the snow like an outcast. The next morning, I went to their house, fury burning in my chest, determined to demand answers. But instead of an apology, I was met with a chilling surprise, one as sharp as a knife to the heart. If you want to know what happened next, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below with the city you're watching from. At 56 years old, after decades of unexpected phone calls about accidents, emergencies, and even deaths within the family, I thought I had grown numb to crisis. 28 years of marriage had taught me to brace for surprises, but nothing could have prepared me for Karen's voice at 3 a.m., fragile, trembling, laced with a fear I had never once heard from her. "David, please. I need help. They left me here." The sound of her voice pierced straight through my chest. I could hear her stifled sobs, the ragged breaths, and the terrifying pauses as if she was trying to smother the sound of her own crying. Behind her words, the wind howled through the receiver, a bitter soundtrack to her desperation. "Where are you? What happened?" I demanded. Her words broke apart. "At a gas station. Miller's Corner. I think it's Route 47. She choked back another sob. "Michael, I'm so cold. My phone's about to die." Miller's Corner. The name conjured an image so vivid it made my stomach twist. A decaying gas station with a flickering neon sign, the emptiness of Route 47 stretching into black infinity. I imagined Karen huddled against a crumbling brick wall, her body battered by gusts of freezing wind that stole every breath she tried to take. "Stay put. I'm coming for you right now." I tore open the closet, yanking down the thickest coat I could grab. My hands shook so violently I dropped the keys twice before jamming them into the ignition. My pulse hammered so hard it felt as though my chest would split apart. The truck roared to life, headlights slicing into the heavy blackness. Outside, the night pressed against the windshield like a suffocating weight. Every mile marker I passed seemed to mock me, flashing by as though reminding me how far away she still was. The headlights reached no more than a few dozen yards, leaving the highway ahead a never-ending tunnel of shadow. 200 miles had never felt longer, and all the while, her voice echoed in my ears. Karen, my strong, steady wife who had weathered nearly 3 decades of storms with me, sounded nothing like the woman I knew. That night she was transformed into something unbearably fragile, like a child abandoned in the cold, pleading for someone to come save her before the darkness swallowed her whole. In 28 years of marriage, I had never heard Karen's voice sound like that. By the time I finally pulled into the cracked parking lot of the gas station, the truck's headlights swept across the scene, and I spotted her instantly. Karen sat huddled beneath the flickering glow of a failing fluorescent light, her back pressed against a brick wall mottled with damp moss. The February air turned every shaky exhale into white clouds that drifted upward and vanished in the night. Her coat, far too thin for the brutal cold, clung to her shoulders like a paper shield against a blizzard. Her hands were raw, chapped and trembling, wrapped around her arms in a futile attempt to cling to what little warmth remained. Her shoes were soaked through, the thin socks inside offering no defense from the frozen ground that seemed to draw the life right out of her body. Even from across the lot, I could see the shivering rack her frame, every tremor sharper than the last. "Karen!" I shouted, my voice breaking as I ran toward her. She lifted her head slowly, and the sight nearly crushed me. Her face was pale, nearly bluish, drained by the cold. But it was her eyes that stopped me dead, the eyes of the woman I had shared nearly 3 decades with. They held a terror I had never seen before, a raw, unfiltered fear that cut deeper than any winter wind. "Oh God, Michael," she gasped. Then she collapsed into my arms. Her body felt weightless and fragile, her ribs sharp beneath my grip. Her skin was ice even through her coat, and I clutched her tighter, terrified that if I let go, she might slip away into the night itself. "I didn't think you'd come," she whispered, her breath catching. "Of course I came," I said, holding her closer. "What happened? Where's the car?" Karen leaned back slightly, her lips trembling, eyes shadowed by exhaustion and betrayal. That's when I noticed the dark circles etched under her eyes, the ceaseless shaking of her hands. "Emily," she rasped. "She took my keys. She told me I wasn't welcome anymore." The words struck me like a blow. Emily, our daughter, 32 years old. The girl who used to call us every Sunday evening just to check in. The daughter who had once brought Jason, her husband, over for family dinners, laughing around the table like the perfect child we thought we'd raised. I could barely force the words out. "No, not Emily. The same little girl I taught to ride her bike, to write her name. She's the one who threw you out into the snow?" Karen's tears welled, spilling down her frozen cheeks. She was furious, Michael. She said things I never thought I'd hear from her. Her voice cracked. "And Jason?" He just stood there. He didn't say a word. He crossed his arms and watched, like none of it mattered. He didn't even offer me a blanket. Then Emily told me to get out, to figure out my own way home. My heart clenched at the image my wife, abandoned in the dark by the very people we trusted most. The betrayal cut deeper than the cold ever could. I helped Karen into the truck and cranked the heat as high as it would go. She curled up on the passenger seat, her body shrunken, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she feared she might shatter if she let go. Her breaths were so thin and fragile that they fogged the window beside her, faint little clouds that lingered before dissolving into the cold glass. The truck barreled down the highway, headlights carving through the curtain of falling snow. Inside, silence pressed against us, thick and suffocating, like sitting in a chapel built for grief. The only sounds were Karen's occasional sniffles and the harsh whine of the heater struggling to keep up. I kept glancing at her from the corner of my eye. Color was slowly returning to her cheeks, but something else clung to her, something heavier than frostbite or exhaustion. Her fingers twisted her wedding ring again and again, the gold band glinting coldly under the dashboard light. I knew that gesture. She only did it when she was hiding something, when a truth she feared would unravel everything weighed on her chest. "Karen," I said finally, my voice breaking the silence, "you're not telling me something. What is it?" For a long time, she kept her gaze fixed on the snowy blur outside the window. The minutes dragged, the hum of the tires filling the void between us. Then, in a voice so faint it was nearly swallowed by the engine, she whispered, "She found it, the money." My grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles bleaching white. A cold shiver raced down my spine as though the temperature in the cab had plunged below freezing. "Money?" I forced out, the word jagged in my throat. "What money?" "The inheritance," she said, finally turning to face me. Her eyes glistened with guilt, shimmering pools that held the reflection of years of secrets. "From Margaret." Emily found the papers. It felt as though a block of ice had lodged itself in my stomach. My thoughts spun wildly. "Papers? What papers?" Karen swallowed hard. "Your mother didn't just leave us that house, the one we sold 3 years ago. There's more, Michael. There's the Vermont property, the one no one knew about." I could barely breathe. "How much more?" Her lips trembled as she said it. $800,000. The words crashed through the truck like a hammer blow. 800,000. My chest tightened so violently that I almost swerved off the road. I steadied the wheel with shaking hands, my heart pounding against my ribs. The number echoed in my head, loud and relentless, drowning out even the howl of the winter storm. I turned toward her, my voice hoarse, thick with disbelief. $800,000, and you've kept this hidden from me all these years? Her face crumpled, tears spilling freely now. She clutched her arms tighter, as if trying to hold herself together. I thought I was protecting us, protecting Emily, but now she knows. The truck roared on through the night, but between us, the silence returned heavier than before, filled with betrayal, with questions, and with the chilling realization that the storm we were driving through was nothing compared to the one waiting at home. My hands slipped on the steering wheel, the truck jerking toward the shoulder. I yanked it back just in time, heart pounding so violently it rattled in my chest. $800,000. The number thundered through my skull like a sledgehammer, every beat of my pulse slamming against my ribs. Margaret had died 5 years ago. 5 years in which Karen and I had sat together at the dining room table, combing through every envelope, every scrap of paperwork, every legal document. Or at least that's what I thought. You knew about this for 5 years? My voice cracked with disbelief. 5 years, Karen, and you never once told me? Her reply came in fragments, her voice trembling, fragile as a thread on the verge of snapping. I meant to tell you, Michael. But then I started thinking about what I should do with it, and I made a decision. I stared at her, the words sticking in my throat like glass shards. What kind of decision? Karen drew in a shaky breath, her eyes wet but steady. I want it to go to the children's hospital, the one where Emily volunteers. I thought it would be a beautiful surprise, a way to honor my mother and to give something back to children who need it most. Her words hung in the air like smoke, curling around me, choking me. The thought that she had carried this secret alone for half a decade sent a wave of vertigo crashing through me. We had shared every bill, every overdue notice, every penny-pinched grocery run. Yet nearly $1 million had been locked away in silence, buried behind closed lips. In my mind's eye, I saw Emily's face when she uncovered the appraisal documents. First the flicker of hope, then the blazing fire of rage when Karen told her the truth that money she had believed would secure her future, was already promised elsewhere. The fury in our daughter's eyes wouldn't have been simple disappointment. It would have been betrayal. By the time I pulled into our driveway and killed the engine, neither of us moved to open the doors. We sat frozen, 2 figures carved in stone. The silence was so thick, I could hear my own heartbeat hammering in the stillness. She called me selfish, Karen whispered finally, staring down at her trembling hands. She said I was stealing from my own family. And Jason? I asked, though I already knew. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, sharp and hollow. Jason agreed with her. He said I'd been manipulated by the hospital, that they had brainwashed me into giving up Emily's future. I turned toward her slowly, the weight of what she had done pressing down on me like an avalanche. She had made this choice alone, a unilateral decision about nearly $1 million without her husband, without her daughter, without anyone. And now, that secret had detonated. The blast had already fractured our family. And as the silence between us deepened, I feared it might never be pieced back together again. Michael, there's something else. Karen's voice quivered like a thread about to snap, so faint it nearly vanished beneath the steady tick of the clock on the mantel. I froze, unsure if I'd misheard, or if she had truly spoken the words I'd been dreading all night. She turned fully toward me, and in that instant I saw it fear etched into her eyes, raw and unfiltered, as if confessing aloud would cause the fragile scaffolding of our lives to crumble into dust. Emily said something before she left me at the gas station, Karen whispered, her lips trembling. She said she knows I've been hiding more. She said she'll uncover every secret I've ever kept, every document, every number, every lie. She'll rip this family apart piece by piece until it all comes out. A chill shot down my spine, colder than the February wind that had gnawed at us the night before. Her words felt less like a warning and more like a curse, a prophecy that the walls we'd built to contain the past were about to be torn down brick by brick. "Karen," I rasped, my throat tight. "Tell me this is it. Tell me the house in Vermont, the $800,000, that was all." My chest rose and fell sharply as I searched her face for truth, for mercy, but she looked away. Her gaze dropped to the frost-laced stone path beneath our feet, and she pulled her coat tighter around her trembling frame. "Let's go inside, Michael," she murmured, her voice frayed. "You need warmth, and so do I. The rest can wait until tomorrow." The weight of her evasion settled heavily between us as we walked toward the front door. My mind churned, replaying Emily's furious vow, hearing again her promise to unearth everything. As I crossed the threshold of our home, I knew with bone-deep certainty, finding Karen stranded at that desolate gas station hadn't been the end of our nightmare. It had been the beginning. Whatever Emily had discovered, whatever storm had driven her to cast her mother out into the snow, it was bigger than a deed worth $800,000. It was a bomb buried in our family's past, its fuse already lit, and tomorrow it would explode. That night, I barely slept a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the shrill whistle of the wind through the phone, saw Karen's terrified face at that lonely gas station flashing before me like a ghost. Her trembling voice, her confession that Emily had looked at her not just with anger, but with hatred, echoed again and again. Even the old wooden beams of the house groaned in the night, and each creak jolted me upright as though the walls themselves carried secrets. By 6 a.m, I gave up pretending to sleep and stumbled into the kitchen. The coffee pot hissed and dripped, each drop sounding louder than it should, as if mocking the silence that pressed against the room. The tick of the wall clock was dry, mechanical, and oppressive. Our kitchen, usually warm and familiar, felt more like a morgue, a place holding the weight of words too heavy to speak. Karen came down around 7. Her steps dragged against the stairs, slow and weary, every creak of wood beneath her feet betraying the burden she carried. She looked decades older than the woman I had married 28 years ago, dressed in warm clothes, yes, but fragile, as if she could splinter at the slightest touch. "How are you feeling?" I asked, pouring her a cup of coffee. She wrapped her fingers around the mug as though it were the only source of warmth left to her. Her voice cracked. "Like I've lost my daughter." She lowered herself into the chair, shoulders sagging under invisible weight. "Michael, I can't stop seeing Emily's eyes. It wasn't just anger, it was disgust. She looked at me as if I were a thief, a traitor to my own family." I sat opposite, watching her face in the pale morning light. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but there was something else in her expression, something that twisted my stomach in fear. "Karen," I said carefully, "last night you mentioned Emily thought you were hiding more. What did you mean by that?" For a long time, she didn't answer. The silence stretched until I feared she'd never speak. Then her words came out in a trembling whisper, barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator. "There may be some stock certificates from my father, blue chips he bought in the 70s. They've been sitting in a safe deposit box for 20 years. The room tilted. My hand gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles blanched. "How much, Karen?" Her eyes darted away. "I had them appraised last year. About 400,000. The numbers hammered into my skull. 400,000, added to the Vermont house. 800,000. Over $1 million. My wife, the woman I thought I knew down to the last detail, had been sitting on more than $1 million, and I had known nothing. Why?" My voice broke. "Why would you hide that from me? From Emily?" Tears spilled freely now. "Because I saw what money did to my family, Michael. When my father died, his children tore each other apart over pennies. My mother's side fought tooth and nail over the will. I swore I'd never let that poison seep into my own life. So yes, I kept it hidden. I told myself I was protecting us." Her tone sharpened, defensive. "I planned to give most of it away. The children's hospital, an animal rescue, maybe a scholarship fund. I wanted the money to heal, not destroy." "But Karen," I said, leaning forward, You're not protecting us by lying. You're creating the very disaster you feared." She flinched, as if I'd struck her. "I thought if I handled it quietly, if I made the donations without anyone knowing, it would be better. Cleaner." I stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the backyard stretched before me, the old swing set still rusting in the corner. Its chains squeaked in the wind, the wooden seat peeling. But in my mind I saw Emily as a child, her small legs pumping, laughter carrying on the summer air, when the biggest worry we had was whether she'd spill ice cream on her dress. Those days felt like another lifetime. Behind me, Karen's voice broke the silence. Last night, when Emily screamed at me, she said something else. She said she'd spoken to a lawyer. I turned sharply. "A lawyer? About what?" "About contesting my mother's will. About whether hiding assets from your own family could be considered fraud." Her words cut like blades. My chest tightened until breathing hurt. Emily wasn't just angry. She was considering legal action against her own mother. "Did she name the lawyer?" I asked. "No," Karen whispered, shaking her head. "But Jason seemed to know an awful lot about inheritance law. Too much." I looked at my wife, then really looked at her. She was a woman who had made choices she thought were righteous, but in her silence had unleashed a storm. The money she had tried so desperately to protect had done exactly what she feared. It had torn us apart. "I'll see Emily this afternoon," I said at last. "I need to know what's truly happening." "What will you tell her?" Karen's voice trembled, a plea hidden in the question. "The truth," I said, "that you made mistakes, yes, but they were born of love, not greed. And no matter how furious she is, no daughter has the right to abandon her mother in the middle of nowhere." Karen nodded, but doubt clouded her eyes. She wasn't sure love was enough to bridge the chasm between us anymore. To be honest, neither was I. Still, I knew one thing for certain. Today I would discover just how far my daughter was willing to go to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. And that answer, whatever it was, would change everything I thought I knew about the family I had spent my life building. By late morning, I had worn a path in the living room carpet, replaying every conversation with Emily in recent months, searching for cracks I had ignored. Had she seemed more anxious about money? Had Jason dropped hints about debts, about loans? The more I thought, the more I realized how little I truly knew about their lives. At noon I couldn't wait any longer. I grabbed my keys and drove to their house, a modest 2-story colonial in a tidy neighborhood just 20 minutes away. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Jason's BMW gleaming there, polished to perfection. Good. I wanted answers from them both. The door flung open before I could even lift my hand to knock, as if Emily had been standing on the other side, counting my footsteps up the path. Her eyes were ice, no makeup, hair scraped into a tight ponytail, exhaustion stamped under her lids, but her posture was iron. "Dad." She shifted just enough to let me pass, the gesture clipped and procedural, like a traffic officer waving a car through an accident scene rather than a daughter welcoming her father. "Emily, we need to talk about last night." "You're right," she said, and the words landed like a gavel. "We do." She led me into the living room. Jason sat ramrod straight on the sofa, a fortress of papers stacked around him like legal barricades. His laptop glowed, its screen reflecting in the taut planes of his face. He looked at me not like family, but like opposing counsel. "Jason," I said with a neutral nod. "Michael. Glad you came." He clicked the laptop shut with a tidy final sound and squared the piles of documents. "We've been doing some research." "On what?" I asked. Emily perched on the edge of an armchair opposite me, spine stiff, hands clenched. "On our legal options, when a family member hides assets and plans to cut their child out of her inheritance." The accusation hit like a gut punch. "Emily, your mother isn't trying to disinherit you," I said. "Karen was trying to do something good with what she inherited." "Something good?" Emily's voice climbed. "Do you even grasp how much money we're talking about? She told me about the Vermont property and the stock certificates. I know it's significant." Jason leaned forward, eyes bright with cold certainty. Did she also tell you about the life insurance policies? A cold line traced my spine. The what? I croaked, lost for a second. Life insurance? That's not possible. Jason's tone shifted into lecturing precision. Whole life policies, Michael. You don't collect premiums from the dead. You maintain the policies, they accrue value, they pay dividends. Your wife did exactly that over 15 years. I stared, trying to force the pieces into some shape that made sense. How much are we talking about? Emily answered without blinking. Combined value, around 300,000. She lifted her chin, and the next words were a verdict. It's been sitting there growing while Jason and I drowned in debt. What debt? I said, stunned. You both have good jobs. You live comfortably. Jason's mouth twitched, not a smile, just a fissure widening. Good jobs? I was laid off 8 months ago, Michael. 8 months of juggling overdue statements. Emily's part-time shifts at the Children's Hospital barely cover groceries. We're behind on the mortgage, cards are maxed, and bankruptcy is staring us in the face. The room blurred for a beat. Why didn't you tell us? Because Mom made it clear she wasn't interested in helping, Emily snapped, bitterness roughening her voice. Every time I brought up money, she changed the subject. Now I know why. Her eyes flashed. She was sitting on over $1 million while we begged the bank for extensions. That's not fair, Emily, I said quietly. Your mother didn't know how bad things were. Jason slid a sheet from one of the piles and held it up between 2 fingers. This is the letter Emily sent Karen 6 months ago asking for a small loan to catch up the mortgage. 20,000. Your wife never responded. 20,000. My throat closed as I took the paper. Emily's handwriting tilted across the page, pleading, ashamed, promising to repay. The corners of the letter were creased and soft, as though it had been held too tightly, too often. Tears burned my eyes. Karen had never shown me this. I don't understand, I said hoarsely. She didn't tell you because she didn't want to help, Emily said, tears spilling now. She ignored my letter, dodged my calls. I figured you two were struggling or she was disappointed in us. I never imagined she was hoarding money. My thoughts spun. How many secrets had Karen carried alone? How many had I lived beside without seeing? Where did you even find all of this? I asked. Jason answered smoothly. Emily was helping your wife sort old tax paperwork. She noticed anomalies, premium payments to insurance companies, property tax bills for unfamiliar addresses. When she asked, Karen got defensive. Emily's jaw tightened, so I kept looking. I found the safe deposit key in her jewelry box. I'm a co-signer she added me years ago for emergency planning and forgot. I went to the bank the next day. You went through your mother's box without her permission, I said. I didn't need permission, she shot back. My name is on it. The picture sharpened into something harsh and unflattering. Karen hadn't just hidden money. She'd also ignored her daughter's pleas while holding assets that could have changed everything. Emily, I understand why you're furious, I said. Jason cut in, leaning forward, palm cracking against the table so the paper piles shivered. Understanding doesn't pay the mortgage. Do you know the feeling of lying awake every night, wondering when the house will go, when your credit's ruined while your mother-in-law sits on a mountain of cash she's planning to hand to strangers? I looked at my daughter, really looked. The strain carved fine lines at her temples, weight she didn't have to lose, a thinness born of stress and skipped meals. How had I missed this? Why didn't you come to me? I asked softly. If your mother wouldn't engage, why not ask me? Emily's face crumpled, then hardened again. Because it felt like failure. Because asking parents for money is humiliating. And because every time I tried to talk to you seriously, Mom took over the conversation. Another piece slid into place with an ugly click. Karen had always managed our financial narrative, shielding me from details I thought were handled. Responsible, I'd called it. Maybe it had been control. What do you want from me now? I asked at last. Jason answered for her. Fairness. Emily is Karen's only child. That money is her inheritance, not a philanthropic slush fund. And we want it now, Emily said, before she can hide it somewhere else or donate it out of spite. The demand hung between us, heavy and desperate. This wasn't only anger. It was panic, the kind that drives people to places they swore they'd never go. "And if your mother refuses?" I asked. Jason's face set. "Then we file. Elder financial abuse, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We've mapped the playbook." "You'd sue your own mother?" I said to Emily. "Our mother chose strangers over her family," she fired back. "That hospital raises millions every year. They don't need her money, we do." I watched my daughter Karen's stubbornness in her eyes. Yes, but also the raw wound of betrayal. No one in this room was entirely right. No one was entirely wrong. "Give me time to talk to your mother," I said, forcing calm into my tone. "Let me try to help her understand your side of this." "How long?" Jason asked, checking his watch as if we were scheduling a deposition. "A few days. Maybe a week." "No," he said flatly. "We've waited long enough. We need an answer by the end of this weekend." "And if she says no?" I asked. Emily held my gaze, her eyes blazing, the same eyes that once looked at me like I could fix anything. "Then we file Monday morning. And we'll win. The attorney we consulted said cases like this are getting traction. Courts are taking them seriously." The word hung there, seriously, as the living room seemed to shrink around us. This was no longer a family argument. This was a battlefield. The floorboards complained under my pacing. The wall clock ticked like a metronome of accusation. I looped from kitchen to window and back again, each circuit dredging up a fragment of conversation with Emily. Dry leaves whipped through a gust of memory. The longer I scoured my recollections, the larger the gap became between the father who thought he knew his daughter and the truth. I didn't know much about her life at all. By noon I couldn't stand the waiting. The 20-minute drive stretched into an hour in my head. Turn signals winked down quiet streets, while neat colonial facades lined up like spectators awaiting a verdict. Jason's black BMW sat in their driveway like a bolded exclamation point. Good. I wanted to hear from both of them. The door swung open before I could lift my hand. Emily had been listening for my steps. Dark crescents shadowed her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail. The vitality had drained from her face, but steel burned in her gaze, the kind you see in someone who's arrived with a prepared judgment. She slid aside just enough for me to edge in, shoulders squared, a perfunctory admission rather than a welcome. "Dad, Emily, we need to talk about last night." "You're right," she said flatly. "We do." She led me to the living room. Jason sat upright on the sofa, papers arranged in crisp stacks like indictments. His laptop was open to color-streaked highlights, passages bracketed in red, the evidence. A phone on the table had a voice memo app open, timestamp ticking. He didn't want to miss a word. "Jason," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Michael, glad you could make it." He shut the laptop with courtroom finality. "We did some research." "On what?" Emily perched across from me, posture rigid. "On our legal options when a family member hides assets and plans to cut their child out of her inheritance." The accusation landed like a punch. "Emily, your mother isn't trying to disinherit you," I said. "Karen is trying to do something good with what she inherited." "Something good?" Her voice sharpened. "Do you understand the scale?" She told me about the Vermont property and the stock certificates. "I know it's substantial." Jason leaned in, eyes bright, voice cooling. "Did she also tell you about the life insurance policies?" A needle of ice ran the length of my spine. "What policies?" I heard myself ask, then repeated it as if saying the words again might anchor reason. "Whole life, dividend paying," Jason said, lecturing, each syllable a stone tossed on already cracked ice. "You maintain them after the insured passes. They continue to accrue value. Your wife did exactly that for 15 years. I stared, trying to make the math behave. "How much are we talking?" "Roughly 300,000 combined," Emily said, unblinking. "It's been sitting there compounding while we're drowning," she added. "What debt?" I asked. "You both have good jobs. You live well." Jason's mouth twitched, not a smile, a fissure. "Good jobs? I've been out of work 8 months, Michael. Emily's part-time at the Children's Hospital covers groceries. We're behind on the mortgage, cards maxed, Bankruptcy on the table. This was the first I'd heard. Why didn't you tell us? Because Mom made it clear she wasn't helping, Emily said, bitterness roughening every word. Any time I raised money, she changed the subject. Now I know why. She was sitting on more than $1 million, Emily went on, eyes wet, while we begged banks for extensions. That isn't fair, I said softly. Your mother didn't know you were in this deep. Jason slid a letter from a stack and held it up. This is the note Emily sent Karen 6 months ago asking for a small loan to catch up the mortgage. $20,000. No response. My hands shook as I took it. Emily's handwriting listed fears and figures in tilted lines. Mom, Dad, I'm ashamed to ask. We'll pay you back. The corner was crushed from being clutched too hard. The ink paused mid-sentence, as if a tear had fallen and been wiped away. Karen had never shown me any of it. I don't understand. She didn't tell you because she didn't want to help, Emily said, tears spilling. She ignored the letter, dodged my calls. I thought maybe you two were struggling. I never imagined she was hoarding money. My mind reeled. How many secrets had I lived beside? Where did you even find all of this? Emily was helping sort tax files, Jason said smoothly. She spotted anomalies, insurance premiums, property tax bills for addresses we didn't recognize. When she asked, Karen got defensive. So I kept looking, Emily said, jaw tight. I found the safe deposit key in her jewelry box. She added me years ago as a co-signer for emergencies and forgot. I went to the bank the next day. You went through your mother's box without permission? I didn't need permission, she shot back. My name's on it. The picture sharpened into something unkind. Karen hadn't just hidden money. She'd ignored her daughter's pleas while holding assets that could have changed everything. Emily, I understand why you're furious, I said. Jason leaned forward, palm thumping the coffee table. The paper stacks trembled. Understanding doesn't pay arrears. Do you know what it's like to lie awake counting the days until the house goes, watching your credit burn while your mother-in-law sits on a mountain she plans to give away to strangers? I really looked at my daughter. The fine blue web of veins at her temples, the hollowed cheeks, the fatigue etched deep. How had I missed this? Why didn't you come to me? I asked quietly. If your mother wouldn't engage, why not call me? Because it feels like failure to ask your parents for money, she said, voice cracking, then hardening. And because every time I tried to talk about anything serious, Mom steered the conversation away. Another piece clicked into place. Karen had long curated our financial narrative, shielding me from details I assumed she handled. I'd called it responsible. It looked a lot like control. What do you want from me now? Fairness, Jason said before she could answer. Emily is Karen's only child. That money is her inheritance, not a philanthropic slush fund. And we want it now, Emily added, before she hides it or gives it away out of spite. The demand hung in the room like heavy weather. This wasn't just anger, it was desperation, the kind that makes otherwise decent people consider indecent options. And if your mother refuses? Jason checked his watch, as if setting a court date. Then we file. Elder financial abuse. Breach of fiduciary duty. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. He recited the counts like a menu, steady, cold, without a stumble. We've consulted, mapped the strategy, prepared the file. You'd sue your own mother? I asked Emily. Our mother chose strangers over family, she said, heat flaring. That hospital pulls in millions. They don't need her money. We do. No one here was completely right. No one was completely wrong. Give me a few days, I said, keeping my voice flat as still water though a current roared beneath. Let me talk to your mother. Let me try to make her understand. Weekend, Jason said, slicing the air. Answer by Sunday. And if she says no? Emily met my eyes, the same eyes that once saw me as a hero. We file Monday morning, and we'll win. The attorney said these cases are gaining traction. Courts are listening. The living room seemed to contract around us. Between the polished legal language and the stacked exhibits, something smelled off like a story rehearsed, one beat too clean. I could feel it. A dark patch both of them were standing in front of, blocking my view. There was more here than either wanted to admit. I didn't drive straight home after leaving Emily's. I cut the engine and sat motionless in the dark at the edge of their driveway, the dashboard clock ticking like a tiny hammer. 10 minutes stretched thin and brittle. Jason's story kept looping, each pass turning up a warped puzzle piece. Something didn't fit, but I couldn't yet name it. When I finally walked into our kitchen, Karen was waiting at the table with a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. A brown tide mark stained the saucer where the steam used to be. She gripped the handle like it was the last thing tethering her to hope. "How did it go?" Her voice carried a desperate brightness. I sat opposite her, unsure where to begin. "Karen, did Emily send you a letter 6 months ago asking for help with the mortgage?" The blood drained from her face. Her knuckles bleached white around the teacup. For a second I thought the porcelain would shatter in her hands. "How do you know about that?" "They showed me." "Why didn't you tell me?" Karen stared into the lukewarm tea as if an answer might surface. "Because I was afraid you'd want to help them." "Of course I wanted to help them. She's our daughter." "With what money, Michael? Our savings? Our retirement? We're not wealthy. You have over $1 million across accounts and a safe deposit box." "That's not ours," she said, eyes snapping up. "It's my parents' money. I'm the steward, not the owner." I rubbed my temples, a headache rising. "Inheritance doesn't work that way, Karen. Margaret left it to you. It's yours to decide." And I decided to do good with it, not subsidize bad financial choices. Bad choices? Jason lost his job. That isn't a choice, it's misfortune. Her expression shifted, something wary, brittle. "Is that what he told you?" The tone snagged me. "What are you saying?" "Jason didn't just lose his job, Michael. He was thrown out." Her voice had gone husky, each word dropping like a weight. "Fired." "For what?" Karen stood, crossed to the junk drawer, and pulled out a thick, scuffed manila envelope. She laid it on the table with a flat thud that sounded like a gavel. "After Emily's letter, I got worried, so I checked." Inside were printouts, articles, court dockets, what looked like HR records. A headline punched me between the eyes. "Local software engineer arrested for embezzlement." My stomach cinched. "Jason was stealing from his company," Karen said. "Small withdrawals at first, then bigger. They caught him, terminated him, and pressed charges. The only reason he isn't in prison is the restitution agreement." I scanned the lines. Over 2 years, siphoning from client accounts nearly $60,000 by the time it surfaced. Calculated theft, not a lapse. The room tilted. My throat closed. "That's why they need money. Not because he's unemployed, but because he has to pay back what he stole." Karen nodded, eyes hard with a sorrow I recognized. "And the restitution is what pushed them behind on the mortgage. Their crisis isn't bad luck, Michael. It's the consequence of Jason's crimes." "Does Emily know?" "I don't think so. Look at the dates. He was fired in March. The criminal charges weren't filed until May. Her letter was April. She may have believed he'd simply been let go." Nausea swelled. Emily, my daughter, had been living with a criminal, trusting him, following his lead as he weaponized her anger at her mother to shield his own sins. "Why didn't you tell her? Why didn't you tell me?" Karen bit her lip, the fight draining from her shoulders. "I hoped he'd confess. I hoped he'd be honest, and maybe they could fix it together." Bitterness roughened her tone. "I chose to let her hate me rather than watch her marriage collapse because she discovered her husband is a thief." I set the article down. My hands shook. "You can't keep deciding for everyone. You can't protect us from the truth." "I know that now," she whispered. "But if you were me, would you blow up Emily's marriage to protect your own reputation?" It was a fair question, and I didn't have a clean answer. I only knew this. Secrets had made everything worse. "There's more," Karen said quietly. My pulse kicked. "More?" My pulse kicked. "More that Jason isn't telling Emily, and that I found." She slid another sheet across the table. Credit report pages, cold and clinical. Cash advances, transfers to betting platforms, payday-style lenders with predatory names. "He gambles," she said. "Online poker, sports books." The embezzlement didn't just cover bills, it fed his habit. The ledger read like bloodstains on snow, stark, inarguable. A column of withdrawals from sites I'd never heard of, but whose very names reeked of traps. How much? From what I can piece together, at least 40, maybe 50,000. But the pattern suggests more. It's a hole with no bottom. An image of Emily flashed in love, leaning on a man who wore respectability like a borrowed coat. My gut heaved. I chose to let her hate me, Karen said, voice shaking, rather than let her wake up to the fact that the man sharing her bed is a liar, a thief, and an addict. Better the selfish mother than the broken marriage. I exhaled through my teeth. No more gatekeeping, not from her and not from me. We deal in truth now, however ugly it is. Karen nodded, and for a moment we just listened to the house breathe around us. Outside, the late afternoon light had thinned to ash. Somewhere between Emily's letter and Jason's lies, our family had been pushed to the edge. Now I finally understood who'd been doing the pushing and why his story had never quite added up. And you think he's using Emily's anger over the inheritance as leverage to cover his debts? I asked, the words tasting bitter. Karen's voice was tight. I think Jason saw his chance the moment Emily stumbled across those papers. He stoked her outrage, whispered in her ear about injustice, painted you as the enemy, because if Emily gets that inheritance, he gets it too. Exactly, I muttered. The pieces fit, ugly as they were. Emily, stressed, afraid, desperate to believe there was someone to blame, was easier to sway than she realized. I replayed last night in my head. Jason had spoken the most, his delivery unnervingly polished, each phrase as if rehearsed in front of a mirror. He had laid the documents out like evidence in a trial, his posture calm, almost smug. Emily had sat beside him, her eyes wet, her heart already captured by the script he'd written. He had engineered the scene, and she didn't even know she was part of his theater. Karen, we have to tell her the truth. She won't believe it, she said quickly, her voice fraying. Not from me. To her, I'm already a liar. I'm the mother who hoarded money while she suffered. Then we prove it. We show her the court records, the employment files. Karen shook her head violently, eyes bloodshot. Michael, she'll be destroyed. Imagine it, finding out the man you trust with your life has lied about everything. That's worse than thinking your mother betrayed you. She'll be split in two, crushed from both sides. Her words hung heavy. I turned to the window. Outside, the yard was bathed in the dim orange of late afternoon. The old swing set swayed in the wind, rusty chains creaking like an echo of Emily's childhood laughter, back when the hardest choice we faced was what to cook for dinner, not how to keep her from financial ruin. I swallowed hard. Karen, what if we give them something? Not the whole inheritance, but enough to keep them afloat. Enough to save Emily from losing her home. Not for Jason's sake, for hers. The chair screeched as Karen shot up, her voice sharp as broken glass. And what do you call that if not rewarding a thief? You want to scrub Jason's sins clean with a wad of cash? You want to hand him absolution? I held her gaze. No, I want to keep our daughter from falling with him when his world collapses. 30, maybe 40,000, enough to cover the mortgage, a few months of living expenses, the restitution, the gambling debt that's his burden. But Emily doesn't deserve to lose her home because of his crimes. Karen slumped back down, burying her face in her hands. The silence stretched so taut I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, each beat like a hammer. Her shoulders quivered, the weight of choice carving lines deeper into her face. Finally, she lifted her head. Her eyes were dry now, hollowed of tears. If we do this, it won't be a gift. It comes with rules. Non-negotiable. What rules? I asked. Emily goes to a financial counselor. Jason checks into treatment for gambling, real treatment, not excuses. And from this day forward, their finances are an open book. Every dollar in and out is laid bare. Her voice trembled but held firm, like steel wrapped in sorrow. In that moment, I knew Karen wasn't just bargaining with me. She was carving out the only path she saw left to save her daughter without losing herself. The next morning I called Emily and asked if Karen and I could come over to discuss things. There was a long silence before she agreed, and I could hear Jason's muffled voice in the background, low and pressing. "We'll be there at 2, I told her. "If this is just going to be another lecture about gratitude or patience, then don't bother," Emily snapped. "Just give us 1 hour," I pleaded. "That's all I ask." Karen spent the entire morning preparing as if for a trial. She spread the documents across the kitchen table, lining them into neat stacks, each clipped into folders. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were sharp as blades. It wasn't a family visit she was getting ready for, it was a hearing before a jury. On the drive over, I glanced at her. "Are you certain about this approach? If it backfires?" Her voice was steady. "Then at least Emily will know the truth. Whatever happens afterward will be her choice." When we arrived, Emily and Jason were waiting in the living room. The coffee table had been transformed into a barricade of their own legal forms scattered across the surface. Jason's laptop open, red highlighter slashes cutting across lines of text. The room smelled of stale paper and tension. "Mom," Emily greeted, her tone cold but not hostile. "Progress of a sort." "Hello, sweetheart," Karen said evenly, though I could see her hand quiver as Saturday Jason didn't bother with pleasantries. "Well?" Jason demanded. "Are you going to do right by your daughter, or should we file on Monday?" Karen didn't blink. "Before we talk about money, we need to be honest. All of us." Emily stiffened. "We have been honest. We told you about our debts, our situation, everything." Karen's eyes locked on Jason. "And what about you? Do you want to tell Emily why you really aren't working?" Jason's face drained of color, then hardened. "I told her. I was laid off. The economy." "You weren't laid off," Karen cut him off. Her voice wasn't raised, but each word landed like a hammer. "You were fired for embezzlement, and you're facing criminal charges." The silence was deafening. Emily turned slowly to her husband, confusion and dawning horror etched across her face. "What is she talking about?" she whispered. Jason shot to his feet. "She's lying. She's making this up to cover her own selfishness." Karen calmly pulled a thick, reddish-brown envelope from her purse and spread the contents across the table. Newspaper clippings, court filings, employment records. "This is all public record, Jason. Would you like to explain why you stole $60,000 from your company's clients?" Emily picked up a clipping, her hands trembling so violently the paper rustled. Her eyes widened, her skin paling with every line she read, as if the words were draining her blood. "Jason, is this true?" Jason raked a hand through his hair, his composure finally cracking. I can explain. It's not what it looks like." "Then explain," Emily demanded, her voice rising. "Explain how stealing from clients isn't what it looks like." "I borrowed it. I always meant to pay it back." "With what?" I cut in. "The records say you're already behind on restitution payments." Jason whipped toward me, his eyes flashing. "Stay out of this, Michael. This is between me and my wife." "No," Emily said, rising to her feet. Her voice was sharper now, her tears transforming into fury. "This involves my parents because you manipulated our finances to blackmail them for money. Money you need because you're a criminal." The word criminal hit Jason like a fist. His face darkened, veins bulging at his neck. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might lash out. Then he sagged, the fight bleeding from his shoulders. "Fine, I made mistakes. I was covering a temporary cash flow issue." Karen slid forward another stack of papers. "And what about the gambling debts? Were those just cash flow issues too?" Jason froze. $47,000, Karen said flatly. "Online poker, sports betting, payday loans, all here in black and white." She laid down a credit report, red with delinquent balances. The numbers looked like bloodstains on white paper. Emily collapsed back onto the couch, staring at Jason as though seeing him for the first time. "You gambled it away. Every ounce of my effort, every late shift I worked just to cover your addiction." Her voice cracked. "And you made me believe it was about the mortgage." Jason dropped his gaze. "Everyone gambles a little. It's not. 47,000 isn't a little," I snapped. "That's an abyss." Emily's voice was empty now, hollow with realization. "So all this time, You didn't need Mom's money for us. You needed it for you, for your debts. Jason finally slumped into his chair, defiance gone. Emily, I love you. I never wanted this. I screwed up, yes, but we can fix it together. Emily turned, her eyes glassy but fierce. How long have you known? She asked Karen. Karen's face crumpled. Since the letter you wrote. I was terrified for you, so I dug deeper. And you didn't tell me? Emily's anger swung toward her mother, her voice breaking. I hoped Jason would confess himself. I didn't want to be the one to shatter your marriage. Better you hate me than lose him this way. Emily stood and walked to the window, her back to us, her shoulders rigid. The room was thick with silence, broken only by Jason's uneven breathing. I could almost see him calculating his next move. Emily, he said finally, his voice low, almost pleading. Your mom's right about the gambling. I have a problem, but I need help, and I need money. If I don't pay these debts, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? I asked sharply. Jason hesitated, then said, Not all of my creditors are banks. Some aren't patient. The implication hung like smoke. Jason wasn't just facing financial ruin, he was in physical danger, which meant Emily was too. Emily turned back, and I saw the truth dawn on her. You've dragged us into danger, she whispered. No, not if we pay it off quickly. That's why I need your mom's inheritance. You need it, Karen spat. Emily doesn't. You made this mess, and now you want my family's money to bail you out. Jason's mask slipped entirely, his desperation baring its teeth. Your family's money? Emily is your family. I'm her husband. What affects me affects her. Not anymore, Emily said softly. We all turned. She stood at the window, her reflection in the glass gaunt, as if she'd aged a decade in an hour. Her voice, though quiet, was like a blade. I can't be married to someone who lies about everything, who steals, who gambles away our lives while I work myself to exhaustion. That's not a husband, it's a con man. Jason's voice cracked. Emily, please. Everyone makes mistakes. We can get through this. But she shook her head, her decision etched in stone. For the first time, Jason realized the truth. The marriage he had gambled everything on was slipping through his fingers. Mistake? Emily shot up from the couch, her eyes blazing, her voice cracking through the room like a whip. You call it a mistake? You stole money systematically for 2 years, transaction after transaction, month after month. While you bled accounts dry, I was choking down peanut butter sandwiches at work just to save a few dollars. You gambled away thousands while I starved myself of dignity. She spun toward Karen, tears spilling over. And you, Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for the things I said to you at that gas station, for leaving you there. I was wrong. Karen crossed the room in an instant, gathering her daughter into her arms. Emily collapsed against her, her shoulders trembling as if a great weight had finally slipped free. Her sobs were jagged, desperate, breaking through the cold wall that had separated them for months. Karen's own tears streaked down her face as she whispered, You don't have to apologize, sweetheart. You were deceived. You were manipulated. This isn't your fault. Over Emily's shoulder, I saw Jason falter. He stumbled back a step, his hand gripping the edge of the table so tightly the papers beneath his palm crumpled. Sweat beaded along his hairline, his eyes darting about as if searching for an exit. The walls were closing in, and he knew it. Then he laughed, a brittle, joyless sound that curdled the air. Touching, really touching, he sneered. But your family reunion doesn't change anything. Out there, the people I owe don't shed tears over love and forgiveness. They want their money, and if they don't get it, they'll come knocking. And trust me, they don't knock gently. A cold draft slipped through a window left ajar, scattering the papers on the coffee table with a restless whisper. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if the house itself understood the danger wasn't a distant storm, it was already on the doorstep. Emily clutched Karen's hand tighter, her breath catching. But when her eyes locked on Jason, the fire of anger was gone. What remained was something more primal, more chilling, pure fear. She finally understood. The truth hadn't just shattered her marriage. It had dragged her entire family to the edge of something darker, a spiral of danger that could consume them all. The air on the patio was so cold it turned each breath into mist. The motion sensor light cast a weary yellow circle across the damp stone, while the wind pressed against the wooden fence, making it creak like old bones. I slid the glass door shut behind us, sealing in the muffled sound of Emily's sobs. Through the glass, I saw Karen press her forehead against our daughter's hair, her hand stroking slowly, while Emily clasped her palms together as if in prayer. The sight calmed me and steeled me at the same time. Tonight, I had to be ruthless, for their sake. Jason leaned against the railing, trying for nonchalance, but his throat worked nervously, and his eyes flicked side to side, searching for some way to hold the crumbling mask in place. "So," he muttered, "what's your offer?" "This is how it will go," I said evenly. $50,000. The money will be transferred into an escrow account, released only after you've signed divorce papers, surrendered all marital claims, and agreed to a permanent no-contact order. Once that's done, the funds go straight to pay restitution and gambling debts, in that order. Then you disappear from Emily's life for good. Jason barked a short laugh, brittle and hollow. "You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious. You'll hand over the house keys, garage fob, remove your name from joint accounts, utilities, insurance policies. Any tracking apps on Emily's phone, gone. You'll have 7 days to clear your things into storage, supervised. After that, you don't come back." "And if I refuse?" His jaw clenched. I pulled out my phone, tilting it so he could see the screen, a photo of his gambling statements. "Then I file everything. Court records, bank statements, your credit report, all of it to your probation officer, to your former company's legal counsel, to every creditor breathing down your neck. And tomorrow morning, I file for a restraining order to keep you from my wife and daughter." A bead of sweat traced down his temple, even in the cutting wind. His fist tightened, thumb rubbing the ridge of his knuckle, the nervous tick of a man cornered. "This is blackmail," he whispered. "No, Jason. This is a boundary. You've siphoned the love and trust of my daughter for months. Now you pay with distance, permanent distance." I let the silence stretch. "You have 24 hours to sign before a notary. And in case you're thinking of trying something clever, the neighbor next door is a retired cop. He's on his back porch right now." Inside, Karen handed Emily a pen and a checklist titled, "After he leaves." Emily's hand moved steadily, ticking each box, her grip no longer trembling. Jason tried once more. "50 grand won't cover everything. I've got other obligations." "Then sell the BMW, I snapped. "Work for it, sweat for it, but not one more tear of my daughter's pays your debts." His shoulders sagged. He looked down at his shoes, his voice barely audible. "Where are the papers?" I pulled the folder from my coat pocket. The clasp snapped open with a sound like a lock falling shut. A dry leaf spiraled down onto the wooden table between us, turning once, then lying still. I knew then the performance was nearly over. Jason had lost. When Karen and I stepped back inside, Emily was sitting stiffly beside her mother on the sofa. She lifted her head, and I saw it immediately. The decision had already been made. Her eyes were dry now, stripped of tears, leaving only a cold clarity. She sat with her back straight, her hands gripping the edge of the cushion so tightly the knuckles gleamed white. "Jason," she said, her voice steady, measured, a verdict delivered. "I want you out of this house tonight." The words fell heavy into the room. Emily hadn't raised her voice, but each syllable carried the finality of a gavel striking wood. Jason's face twitched. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, but found only Karen's piercing stare and my silent watch. His chest rose and fell too quickly, like an animal cornered. "Emily, please. We can work this out." "No," she replied, her voice iron. "We can't. I cannot build a life with a man who lies about everything." Jason's shoulders slumped. He exhaled sharply, defeat hanging off him like a torn coat. "Fine, but I'll need something to start over. A portion of the inheritance. You know that." "You'll get 50,000, I said evenly. That's it. Take it or leave it. Jason's lips twisted in contempt. 50,000 barely covers the debts. Karen spoke for the first time since we'd returned. Her arms folded across her chest, her tone sharp as a blade. Then perhaps you shouldn't gamble with what was never yours to begin with. His face reddened, his voice rising. This is all your fault. If you had just helped us when Emily asked, none of this would have happened. Karen's eyes narrowed, her words cutting clean. If I'd handed you money 6 months ago, you would have burned through it just the same and then come crawling back for more. Jason opened his mouth to snap back, but Emily's hand slammed onto the coffee table with a crack that silenced him. Enough, she shouted. Her voice trembled, not with weakness but with fury. No more lies, no more excuses. This ends now. The hours that followed blurred into a frenzy of signatures, phone calls, and the grinding machinery of severance. The dining table was buried in paperwork. Phones rang back to back with lawyers, while the metallic grind of the locksmith echoed from the front door. It was as if the entire house had transformed into a war room where the divorce was executed in real time. Jason packed in silence, dragging his suitcase down the stairs with heavy thuds. He paused at the door, his eyes bloodshot, burning with bitter resentment. He looked back one last time, gaze sweeping over us with the cold hatred of a man who could not accept his own defeat. Then he slammed the door behind him and disappeared into the night. Through the front window, I watched his BMW roll down the street until its taillights vanished into the darkness. For the first time in months, the house felt still, though a strange heaviness lingered in the air. "Do you think he'll stay away?" Emily asked quietly. "He will," I said, though my tone left no room for doubt. "Men like Jason only fight when they believe they can win. He's finished here." Karen sat back, eyes shadowed with thought. "I should have told you everything from the start," she admitted, her voice soft but heavy. "About the money, about Jason, about all of it." Emily took her mother's hand, gripping tightly. Her voice was tired but resolute. "You can't protect me from the truth, Mom. I'm not a child anymore. I'd rather live with the brutal truth than with sweet lies." Karen nodded, tears finally falling, but there was no shame in them, only release. "No more secrets," she whispered. Emily squeezed her hand. "No more secrets," she echoed. The vow hung between them, fragile but luminous, the first fragile thread of trust being rewoven. The dining table, once crowded with too many arguments and too many silences, now held only 3 place settings. A pair of small candles flickered between us, casting shifting shadows across Emily's face. She looked weary, but there was also a serenity there I hadn't seen in months. The gentle clink of cutlery against porcelain filled the pauses, a fragile music that kept us company. None of us rushed to speak, as if we all understood that peace itself was the guest of honor that night. Emily had moved back into her old room. A few cardboard boxes still sat unopened in the living room, quiet reminders of her sudden but necessary return. She came home late most evenings, after sessions with a counselor who was helping her untangle the knots Jason had left in her heart. She rarely spoke about the details, but I noticed the heaviness lifting from her eyes, replaced slowly with something brighter, steadier. When I asked if there had been any news from Jason, the air at the table seemed to freeze. Emily set her spoon down and took a measured breath, as though even saying his name required effort. "His lawyer called yesterday," she said. "He's in Nevada now. Supposedly found work in Las Vegas." Karen gave a dry laugh. "A gambler moving to Las Vegas. That'll end well." Emily shook her head firmly. "It doesn't matter anymore. That's his choice, not mine." Later, Karen and I sat together on the back porch. The sun had bled into a copper horizon, painting the maples in molten gold. Karen leaned her head on my shoulder, her hand sliding into mine on the armrest, anchoring us both. After a long silence, she whispered, her voice raw, "David, do you forgive me? For the secrets, for everything I kept from you?" Her eyes stayed on the burning horizon, as if afraid to meet mine. I thought about it, truly thought. Karen's mistakes had been serious, grave even, but they were born not of selfishness, but of love, misguided and desperate. And in the end, Her guardedness with money had spared our family from losing everything to a man who would have drained us dry. "I forgive you," I said. "But no more secrets. We're a team, Karen. We make decisions together." She nodded, her grip on my hand tightening. "No more secrets." 6 months later, my phone rang with a call from a private investigator in Las Vegas. The voice on the other end was clipped, clinical. Jason had been arrested again, this time for check fraud. I sat motionless at my desk, the receiver pressed hard against my ear, feeling a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. A circle had closed. Justice, at last, had caught up with him. I never told Emily about that call. Not all truths are worth reopening old wounds. Emily's life, meanwhile, had begun to heal in earnest. She was seeing someone new, a schoolteacher she'd met at the children's hospital, where she volunteered. Her face lit up whenever she spoke about him, her laughter spilling more freely. Their dates were simple coffee shops, quiet walks, but the joy they brought her was pure and untainted. Karen, cautious as ever, insisted on running a background check. Emily laughed, rolling her eyes, but didn't resist. "Trust, but verify," Karen said, half joking, half deadly serious. "That's my new motto." As for the inheritance, Karen followed through on her plan. She signed the transfer papers at the bank with tears in her eyes but resolve in her voice. $400,000 went to the children's hospital, $200,000 to the local animal rescue, another $50,000 to a foundation supporting families struggling with gambling addiction. "Something good has to come from what Jason did to us," she explained. The remaining $300,000 went into a trust for Emily. She won't touch it until she turns 40, unless life calls for something truly important, like buying a home or raising a family. And written into the trust, in Karen's own hand, was a single stipulation. Not $1 is ever to be used to cover a husband's gambling debts. That night, as I stood at the porch railing, I thought of the road we had traveled, the betrayals, the revelations, the endless nights of doubt. But looking back into the house, where Karen was stacking dishes and Emily was humming softly to herself, I realized we had gained something Jason could never steal: hard-earned clarity, hard-earned peace. Sitting on the back porch one evening, I watched Emily laughing softly with her new boyfriend through the kitchen window. Her shoulders, once hunched under months of shame and sorrow, now moved freely as she gestured animatedly over some small story. In that moment, I realized Karen's deepest wish to shield our family from the corrupting influence of money had, in a twisted way, proven true. The money itself had not corrupted us. Instead, it had peeled back the mask of someone already rotted from within. Jason had not been ruined by wealth, he had simply used it as fuel to reveal who he truly was. I thought back to the nights Karen stayed awake, guarding stacks of papers and account statements in her desk, believing that if she could control the flow of information, she could keep us safe. But the truth is not a creature that can be locked in a drawer. The harder you try to bury it, the more violent its eruption when it finally claws its way to the surface. I had learned, painfully, that the only real way to protect a family is to let light reach every corner. Secrets may seem like shields, but in time, they turn into weapons. The call from Las Vegas months earlier confirmed what I already suspected. Jason had been arrested again, this time for check fraud, preying on elderly gamblers who had little left to lose. It didn't shock me, not anymore. Jason hadn't been poisoned by money. He was already the kind of man who would pawn trust, loyalty, even the future of his own wife, in exchange for the illusion of easy wealth. Money had simply magnified the rot. What lingered, though, was the lesson. When Emily looked at me now, there was no longer that fragile doubt in her eyes, the doubt Jason had planted there. She had survived his betrayal and was reclaiming her independence with a quiet strength that both humbled and reassured me. Karen, too, had changed. She no longer spoke in hushed tones or folded away secrets in the dark. Instead, she made decisions in the open, whether about the trust, about donations, or about family. Transparency had become her way of loving us. And me? I finally understood what gift we had all received in the wreckage of Jason's lies. It wasn't the remainder of the inheritance sitting in a trust account. It wasn't the house or the carefully managed investments. The gift was freedom. Freedom from manipulation. Freedom from secrets that once divided us. Freedom to stand in the truth together, however painful, and still choose each other. As I held Karen's hand and watched Emily step into a new chapter of her life, I knew that what we had gained was worth more than any check ever signed. It was the kind of wealth no one could steal, squander, or gamble away. And that, in the end, was the inheritance that mattered. So, what do you think about this story of trust, secrets, and the true value of family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with others so more people can learn from it. And make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next powerful and emotional story coming your way.